The numbers are in, and Nigeria has cranked up spending for the 2022 budget. President Muhammadu Buhari, while presenting to the National Assembly, said the country is budgeting 6.39 trillion naira, about $39.8 billion for the new year. This is a projected 25% year-on-year rise in government spending as the economy struggles with the impact of the pandemic. The deficit will rise to about 6.26 trillion naira, or 3.39% of GDP, to be funded by new borrowing, proceeds from privatizations, and drawdowns on loans secured for specific projects. The plan for Africa's top oil exporter assumes crude output of 1.88 million barrels a day and an oil price of $57 per barrel. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, afterwards stated that the administration would continue to borrow to finance infrastructure projects as the government does not receive enough from its revenue sources. Justifying government's position, Ahmed added that Nigeria's revenue could barely accommodate services, noting that despite the concerns, its borrowings are still within acceptable limits, as the total money borrowed as of July 22nd was 23% of the gross domestic product. The economy is projected to grow by up to 3% this year, after it expanded by 5% in the second quarter. It contracted in 2020 due to the pandemic, though it managed to exit recession in the fourth quarter, but growth is fragile. Nigeria has passed a string of record budgets since President Buhari took office in 2015, but the country has struggled to fund the spending plans due to low revenues. The pandemic has added to those revenue problems. Is this the budget that will put Nigeria on sure footing for economic recovery and growth? We'll get into this question and others as we look at Nigeria's 2022 budget. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun, Business Edge. Now, joining me today is Muktar Mohammed. He's the CEO of Astra Dynamic Solutions and a regular here on Business Edge. Muktar, welcome once again. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure being here today. I think one very optimistic as you have been in your introduction. I wish I'm that optimistic.
All right, let's get into it. So revenue has been one of the big issues for Nigeria in the past. Whether you say it's under this administration, previous administrations, there has been an alarm raised continuously over Nigeria's revenue issues. According to IMF data, the country has among the lowest revenues globally, with general government revenue between 2015 and 2019 at 7.9% of GDP. Compared with the sub-Saharan African average of 12.7% and a global average of 29.8%. Removing COVID-19 from the picture, why has Nigeria struggled to increase revenue, which is such a large part of its annual budget?
Yes, look, we struggle with that area because we don't have the structure. And when we have the structure, we want to find the easy way out of it. Like I said, structure is one of the things that helps an economy grow. When you are running a structureless economy, you have to struggle with revenue. What I mean structure is we've become, as a government have looked at revenue in the means of just having revenue. They are not seeing revenue as a means of developing the economy. So when you begin to look at revenue as a means of developing the economy, then you begin to have the kind of result that you desire. Now, you want to widen the tax bracket, like what they always say. But the easiest way government think they could widen the tax bracket is to go against small businesses, taxing them, trying to increase taxes on those that are already paying tax. They are not looking at avenues to attract those that are not paying tax, incentives, or attract the big companies to come with incentives so that people that will begin to enjoy some of all those benefits, and then that will also create employment, and that will widen the tax bracket. That is one area government is not looking at, and that is why we always struggle with revenue.
So in his speech to the National Assembly, the president confirmed a previously published 2022 GDP growth forecast of 4.2% and an inflation projection of 13%. He said that the target of the country over the medium term is to grow revenue to GDP ratio from about 8% currently to 15% by 2025. What does Nigeria need to do to make this a reality?
Well, I just told you one of it is to make sure we get more people on the track, on the tax bracket. But by doing that, we also have to widen the tax bracket. By widening the tax bracket, we need to attract most of the people that are not paying tax, especially the informal sectors of business. And how do we attract them? Is by building infrastructure that will help their business grow. If we do that, we attract more into that tax bracket. That is one. Secondly, we have to look at the non-oil sector and see how we can help that sector grow. Because all over the world, because of the pandemic, government is helping sector grow. And then the third thing we need to do, we need to begin to look at the bottom-up approach in terms of developing our economy. So what we do now is the up-down approach, which is more or less like government is the alpha and the omega. Businesses, everything starts and ends with government. And when we're talking about government, we're not even talking about state government, we're talking about federal government. The local government look non-existent. The state government are only existent when it comes to paying salaries. So those are type of things that can bring productivity. When I mean widening tax bracket to create employment, that is productivity. When you begin to have productivity of most Nigerians, especially the youth, then you are beginning to hit the target that you need. Then you widen those tax brackets because most of them will be collecting salary, then they will begin to pay tax, and you have the technology to meet up with that.
So part of the things we're hearing from the presidency is that the adjustments that they're putting forth with this budget presentation are in line with the recently passed Petroleum Industry Bill. So Muktar, tell me, how is the PIA influencing the 2022 budget?
Speaking about the PIB, whether it's not a perfect document or what, but we have a document that we are trying to make it work. So we try to recheck it as we go on. Now, how is that PIB used? You can see because of that PIB bill, the medium-term expenditure was reduced by almost 60 billion. So what the PIB is saying that government will no more have hands in doing a lot of those things that we see some of these companies do. So it is going to be public sector driven. So most of the expenditure that is supposed to go into those sectors are now and even not going to come back to government. They're going to come back to government in terms of revenue. So that is the only way that you are seeing that PIB bill helping also in that tax the budget area. So I think that's a good thing we are saying for the first time. Secondly, is also looking at ways of doing a lot of most of those privatization. They want to sell some of the idle government agencies to private sector.
So let's stay with this conversation around the petroleum industry. So the 2022 budget pegs crude oil at $57 per barrel with an expected output of 1.88 million barrels per day for Nigeria. Looking at the trend of things internationally for crude oil, as well as the country's production capacity and increasing that, is this just about right? Is it conservative or is it too high? Where do you stand with this $57 per barrel pegging?
Tolu, for the first time, I think government has gotten it right in terms of oil price. I think what is the first time that we are getting it right. That's one of the positives I see in this budget. Because at $57 per barrel is very conservative and also is not too much ambitious compared to when we have oil selling at $51 per barrel or putting it at $50 per barrel. Or we have, you remember 2 years ago when the president was putting oil price at $52 per barrel. At the day he was presenting the budget, oil price was $48 per barrel. So this is the first time we are seeing oil price at $87 per barrel, between $81 per barrel on the day the president was presenting it, and it's at $57 per barrel. I think that shows a government that seems to know what they are doing in that area. So for me, that's a very, very good development. For the first time, we are getting it right. Now, what that means is that we'll be able to begin to build up savings, and also that will reduce our budget deficit. For me, that was a good one. And again, the production. If you look at last year, they were doing production at 2.3 billion barrels per day, which was even way above OPEC. At that time, OPEC was trying to cut production. But for the first time also, they have target production at 1.8 billion. I think that's one of the best things we've seen in this budget this year.
All right, so let's quickly talk about the breakdown, some of the numbers involved here. From the breakdown, the Ministry of Works and Housing has a very high allocation, probably the highest, at about 352.65 billion naira, followed by the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning with 158.07. The Defense Ministry is next with 128.94 billion naira, and Transport has 120.6 billion. Health got about 108.29 billion, with education coming in after that. Is this what you would have expected? Coming out of a recession, coming out of a COVID-19 economy that's struggling to get back on its feet, the allocations and the ministries that are in the top 5, is this what you would have expected?
For work and housing, I have my concerns, and my concerns just boil down to one thing. What we should be thinking about when we talk about work and housing, we're talking about a lot of roads, bridges, and that they say they want to construct roads, they want to reconstruct, or remodel. For me, I think that is where the government has not really come out clearly to begin to say what are their strategy, because we should be looking at public-private partnership in this area at the moment. That is what we should be looking at. That is what should be working at this moment. So most of this money that are allocated to the work and housing or road construction and housing should be given to the private sector. And so they will be in turn with the public-private partnership. Using security, your security, which could be in the form of infrastructure, could add up government security to make sure that government get the private sector to make some of these roads, like we see Dangote do, like we see MTN trying to do in the East, and other companies trying to take up road maintenance. So for me, that would have saved a lot. What I see that the government is not doing right is that I expect security to be one of those areas that the government will really put in so much effort and so much resources in tackling the insecurity, because insecurity seems to be what is affecting the economy at this moment. So I don't think government is doing so well in that area. In terms of the way they sharing formula of the budget, I see education going down beneath again. Even after the minister says that 75,000 naira will be paid to every undergraduate or every student in College of Education or in the federal universities that are studying educational courses. So you can see that with the position they are making there, it doesn't seem that is a policy that will see the light of the day.
All right, we're going to go on a break, Muktar. When we come back, we'll get into the budget deficit conversation as well as the borrowing aspects. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari has said that Nigeria will continue to borrow. What does this mean for the economy? We'll find out after the break. Still with me is Muktar Mohammed, the CEO of Astrodynamic Solutions, as we look at some of the numbers coming through from Nigeria's proposed 2022 budget. Now, Muktar, the budget deficit is projected to rise up to about 6.26 trillion naira, or 3.39% of the GDP. This is above the 3% threshold set by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and this is probably due to the economic challenges coming from COVID. Now, President Buhari has said he is aware that people are concerned about the country's borrowing to finance the fiscal gaps. However, his administration says it believes the debt level is still within sustainable limits. Do you share the president's opinion on this? Is Nigeria's debt still within sustainable levels? Hello, Muktar.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hello, Tolu.
Yes.
Okay, I can hear you better now.
All right. So asking about the debt levels for Nigeria, do you think they are within sustainable limits? We have a deficit for the budget for 6.26 trillion, about 3.39% of the GDP. That's above the 3% threshold. The president says he knows people are worried and concerned, but he believes that this is still within sustainable levels. Do you share his views on this?
Not at all. Not at all. I don't share that. The president is trying to use data information that works. And even with that, we're looking at 3% threshold. We're already out of the 3% threshold. Remember, the finance minister used to say that we are very fine because we've not gone beyond the 3% threshold. All of a sudden, the president is saying, even with the 3-point-something% threshold, we are still fine. And he's using debt to GDP, which is not really the issue as right now. What we should be looking at is debt to revenue. You don't pay your revenue by your GDP. you pay your revenue, but you don't pay your debt by your GDP. You pay your debt by your revenue. So once we are grappling with revenue, we are having challenges with revenue. So it's not the GDP that's going to pay the debt, it's the revenue. So I have a challenge, and just like in your introduction, we've talked about the revenue challenge of the government. So it's more or less like a government that is filing a lot of debt for the future generation or the next coming administration to begin to tackle. So for me, I don't think we got it right there. Like I said, most of the projects that we are embarking upon that is causing this budget deficits are projects that could have been handled by the private sector, while the government enhanced policies to help private sector grow. That will help the government, then would have reduced this budget deficit. But as it stands now, I think government wants to do everything themselves, and that is why we continue to have the challenge. And not to forget that the minister did mention that the challenge in government is not in because government cannot even do what they are ought to do, but because of the recurrent expenditure when it comes to salary and allowances. And you and I know that when it comes to salary allowances, it's not the ordinary civil servants that are really enjoying it, or the civil servants that are really enjoying it. It's the political appointees that have staff, that have various staff that have to pay allowances, the appointees that have to go for one training or the other abroad, even when the president said we should suspend that. So the challenge is, how do we bring down recurrent expenditure? How do government hands up projects that private sector can be able to handle? If we do that, then we'll bring down the budget. But as it stands now, I don't think we are doing anything right in that area.
So I want to go further into that, because it was a question I was going to ask you. It was the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning who did confirm that Nigeria does have a revenue problem. We all know that. She said that revenue is increasing, but expenditure, especially staff emoluments, were increasing at a very fast rate, making it difficult to cope with funding for government. Now, she said the answer is a combination of cutting down the cost as well as increasing revenue to be able to cope with all that is required for government to do, including salaries, pension, debt service, and capital expenditure. You've talked about how that can be done in terms of stopping some of the overseas trips that we know we hear a lot about when it comes to civil servants and other things like that. But let's go deeper into this. There's a larger conversation. The country wants to widen the tax net. The country wants to increase taxes. You mentioned just now reforms, having the private sector focus on some of these projects and having government work on policy reforms. What kind of policy reforms are we talking about that you think have the potential to help the country cut down on its cost?
So what I'm talking about when you talk of those policies, I'm talking about tax brackets for the private sector that are going to involve in taking over some of these projects. If I'm a private sector, I want to handle the third mainland bridge, then I should be given a tax bracket for the next 2 to 3 years or 5 years, so that I'll be able to handle those projects. That saves government a lot of costs. What the government always will be looking at, what are the revenue that we get, but you know that the revenue that we get from maintaining of the construction of third mainland, government does not have the wherewithal to sustain revenue in some of these places. We have seen it play out in some of the projects that government has to do. But if you give it to the private sector is going to build those projects to world class, and people will be able to pay to gain access to this infrastructure. But government doesn't have that. So that is the challenge. That's why I'm saying that government needs to partner with the private sector. Instead of using revenue as a seed, tax as a tool for revenue, let's begin to use tax as a tool for development of our economy. That is the new way. That's the new talk of town. That's what we call the new economy, using tax to build your economy rather than using tax for revenue.
There'll be further conversations as people crunch the numbers and we look at where these issues, where the allocations are going line by line. But Nigeria's economic growth has resumed after the COVID shock, but it's lagging behind the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. There's food inflation, heightened insecurity, and stalled reforms that are slowing growth and unfortunately increasing poverty. With the numbers in the budget so far, do you think this is a budget that can put Nigeria on the path to recovery and growth?
Well, I think in some area we might begin to see that in some sector that they will get it right. I've said one sector that they will get it right seems to be the oil and gas sector. And you and I know that that's the sector that the Nigerians tend to strive more in. That's where our revenue mostly comes from. So if we get it right there, that will help. But I'm more or less thinking about how employment, especially for the team Nigerian youth that are almost about 50 to 60% unemployed. And even the 40% that you can say that are employed are underemployed. So for me, that is the major challenge, and that is what I'm looking at. I think with the budget, if the budget address that, I don't think it has been able to address that realistically. But sector by sector, when you look at the budget, you say one sector that is going to gain more from this oil and gas sector.
All right, so we'll leave it at that for now. As I said, going line by line will be coming in the coming days and weeks. This is still a conversation as Nigeria's National Assembly needs to debate the issues around the budget. But Muktar Mohammed, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
My pleasure, Tolulope.
All right. It is, of course, Business Edge right here on News Central. We're going to wrap things up with NC4 to watch right after this. And we start here in West Africa, particularly in Nigeria, where the Coca-Cola system in the country, comprising Nigeria Bottling Company and Coca-Cola Nigeria, says it will invest 560 billion naira in 5 years into the country. The Coca-Cola system, through the bottling arm of the NBC, was incorporated in 1951. Now, from 2007 till date, the company has invested about $1.7 billion in the country for the expansion of production capacity and the building of modern warehouses. Twitter has agreed to sell mobile ad company MoPub to AppLovin Corporation for $1.05 billion in cash. MoPub, which generated about $188 million in annual revenue for Twitter last year, allows companies to keep track of ad inventory in real time, similar to what Alphabet Incorporated's Google does with DoubleClick. A call by South Africa's biggest labor group for workers to stage a one-day national strike on Thursday against budget cuts went largely unanswered. An employers group has said more than 83% of staff reported for duty, ignoring an appeal by the Congress of South African Trade Unions to stay away. A survey of 191 firms conducted by the National Employers Association of South Africa showed the numbers who turned up to work. And finally, the African Development Bank said it will support trade value at $7 billion over the next 5 years in a bid to spur the growth of the world's biggest free trade area. The financier will guarantee loans given to companies to sell their products across the continent in a move that will facilitate the development of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which went into effect January the 1st. The bank will back about 2,000 transactions. And that's Business Edge for this week, making it a wrap throughout the conversations we've had on African business, economy, and financial issues. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Go to our website, download our mobile app, and of course, watch us across numerous different platforms. Until Monday, 11 a.m. West African time, we have a date right here on Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun.